Yeah, hi, I'm Megan. I am one of the members of the Early Careers Committee, um, and I'm doing a presentation today on the archaeology of the underrepresented. Thank you all for coming along, and I hope that you're really enjoying the conference so far. So my brief talk today is going to be focusing on the archaeology of the underrepresented. Before I start, I just wanted to add a content warning because this talk is going to touch on issues of domestic violence, discrimination against disabled people and people of colour, and will also include discussion of human remains. If you feel that this will affect you negatively, please take this time to go grab yourself a cup of tea or take a look at what's going on Twitter, or even go on a quick walk outside. So with that said, let's get started. In recent years, there's been a much more focused effort in archaeology and heritage to look into the stories of underrepresented or unrepresented groups. This is something that I've been interested in for a while, pretty much ever since I looked around my primary school classroom and wondered where I fitted into the history that I was being taught and when most of my classmates fitted into it. Today, I'm going to be very, very briefly touching on a handful of topics. First, I'll be discussing the topic of my master's dissertation, intimate partner violence in Roman Britain. Then I'll touch on a case study of a disabled individual from Viking York, before moving on to another individual who died in York, the Ivory Bangle lady. Finally, I wanted to take the opportunity to share a heritage project that I've recently been involved with, which is Out at Rangers House, a queer history tour that's based in an English heritage property. Finally, I'd also like to share an opportunity to be involved in a focus group on diversity, inclusion and decolonisation in university departments. So firstly, intimate partner violence in Roman Britain. Intimate partner violence, which falls under the umbrella of domestic violence, is perpetrated by romantic or sexual partners. This is obviously very much still an issue today and is made clearer by the rise in domestic violence cases during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. The vast majority of people who are affected by IPV are women, which is why my research focused mainly on Romano-British women, but I do think it's worth noting that this is an issue that can affect any gender. In my research, I compiled a database of 3,757 Romano-British individuals of male, female, and indeterminate sex, representing 87 different cemetery sites. The likelihood of IPV was calculated using a model that was proposed by Allen et al. In 2007, as well as via individual assessment based on injury patterns. I found that Romano-British males were more likely to have injuries typical of sport and physical labour, while Romano-British females had a higher prevalence of injuries that were associated with interpersonal violence. Females from urban populations had a particularly high prevalence of injuries that were associated with IPV, which is primarily injuries to the head, face and neck area. This sort of raised concerns regarding the impact of colonisation and Romanisation on violence against women. However, there has been relatively little written on the topic of women in Roman Britain or the phenomenon of intimate partner violence in archaeology. So I hope to see more research on both of those topics in the future. Another sort of overlooked, underrepresented thing is disability. Medieval disability in general is typically poorly represented. However, we cannot act as if disability or physical impairment was non-existent. A web search for the terms Vikings and disability or medieval disability will lead you to forum sites and history blogs discussing euthanasia and selective infanticide. But is this popular perception of the past accurate? And is this assumption harmful to disabled people today? Disability is a fundamental part of modern human life, with 14.1 million people in the UK living with a disability. It's not unreasonable for us to ask about disability in the past, and disability in the Viking world is no exception to this. This brings us to the case study of a woman from Coppergate in York. This individual is currently on display in the Jorvik Viking Centre, which is a museum that's known for its animatronic recreations of Viking age life in the settlement of Jorvik. And one of the figures in the marketplace, an elderly woman using crutches, who you can see here, is based on this individual. skeleton 15548, or Coppergate woman as she's styled by Jorvik. The remains of Coppergate woman were excavated along with those of 3 other individuals between 1976 and 1981. Skeleton 1558 may be a later burial than the others analysed. She was later radiocarbon dated to 880 to 1030 CE. Coppergate woman was a mature adult female, so she was aged over 46 years old when she died, and she had dental hip dysplasia, which is often sort of colloquially known as congenital hip dysplasia, which affected her right hip. This condition meant that she would have developed a limp. She also had newly robust arms and degenerative joint disease of the shoulders and her right hand, which suggests crutch use during her lifetime. Possible Scandinavian origins have been suggested for Coppergate woman and her 3 peers, and carbon and oxygen isotope analysis suggested potential origins in areas, but results suggest she's potentially an immigrant from southwest Norway, because the different types of isotope analysis overlap in that area. As for her disability, developmental hip dysplasia is a condition where the normal relationship between the femur and the pelvis at the hip joint is lost. This individual would have been disabled and would have had difficulties walking from early childhood, although it's likely that any pain that she experienced was during her lifetime. The public perception of disability in the past, and in this era specifically, assumes that she would have been killed or abandoned as a child due to her disability. This does not appear to have been the case, as Coppergate woman lived to be over 46 years old and much likely older. The context of her being a potential immigrant is also interesting and goes against these misconceptions, as this disabled woman was able to undertake what was likely a difficult journey. I believe there's also a conversation to be had about mobility aids in the past. The skeletal changes that were identified in Coppergate woman in her arms and legs indicate crutch usage, and the use of such mobility aids in the past are certainly worth exploring in future research. We are now moving on to another individual from ancient York, nicknamed the Ivory Bangle Lady. This individual is currently on display in the Yorkshire Museum, and despite being dead for 1600 years, has recently been the victim of racist backlash and attacks. The Ivory Bangle Lady, nicknamed after the ivory jewellery that she was buried with, along with jet bangles and glass jewellery, was a young woman, likely aged between 18 to 23 when she died and was buried in Roman York. Her burial status suggests that she was wealthy and of high status, and it's her ancestry that's led to her being the target of such backlash. Or more accurately, it's led to backlash against archaeological researchers and staff at the Yorkshire Museum who speak about her in their research or on social media. Osteological specialists have determined that the Ivory Bangle Lady was most likely mixed race with North African heritage. An isotopic analysis of her teeth have suggested that she migrated to York from a warmer climate, potentially from Italy or from North Africa. In October 2020, the Yorkshire Museum posted a blog focusing on the Ivory Bangle Lady to celebrate Black History Month. The museum then faced intense backlash, including accusations of being Orwellian and accusations of rewriting history. It seems really absurd to me that in the 2020s, we live in a world where people could be so wound up to the point of fury by the publication of research that just challenges their perception of history. This is a real issue that's currently facing archaeologists and heritage organisations, and it's so important that this research just keeps getting out there and continues to be shared with the public. Another thing that may well get us accused of rewriting history is a project that I've been involved with English Heritage. Since December 2020, I've been lucky enough to be involved with a project with English Heritage Shout Out Loud programme, which focuses on youth engagement in the museums and heritage sector. The project that I've been working on out at Rangers House will be launching in September 2021 and is a queer history tour of the Werner collection at Rangers House in Greenwich. If any of you have watched Bridgerton last year, you'll recognise the front of Rangers House as the Bridgerton's house. It's not the same on the inside. LGBT history has been pushed aside and ignored, to the point where variations in gender and sexuality that have been around for a long time are now treated as like new and trendy. Myself and the Shout Out Loud team hope that Out at Rangers will help demonstrate that LGBT people have always been here and that we can make at least one person feel represented and less alone. I realise that this has been like a whistle-stop tour through a really wide range of issues, and I haven't had time to touch on everything or give everything the sort of time that it deserves. But if any of the issues that I've talked about have resonated with you and you'd like to get involved, the CIfA Early Careers Group are launching an informal discussion focus group on diversity, inclusion and decolonisation in university archaeology departments. We particularly welcome the involvement of current students, but if you're really keen, come along anyway. If you're interested, please send me an email at this email address here, or you can also contact me on Twitter. I'm going to be dropping some further reading links in the chat and on Twitter if anyone would like to learn more about anything that I've discussed today, and I welcome any questions. Thank you for listening.